That leads me on to introduce the topic of today's workshop, which is Revenue Set Go, your tax starter kit. So we have Jessica McCarthy joining us today from Revenue, and her colleagues Sarah and Robbie. So a big welcome to you all. Thank you very much for giving us your time today. Jessica will be presenting and Sarah and Robbie will support with any questions you might have in the Q&A section at the end. So just to give you a quick introduction to Jessica. So Jessica has 6 years of experience working for the Office of the Revenue Commissioners and currently works in the personal division specialising in PAYE tax and Help to Buy. Jessica is responsible for the Cork outreach and regularly represents Revenue at public events. For example, giving presentations to transition year students in schools or to the attendees of the Over 50s Senior Times events. She graduated with honours in film, media and journalism studies from the University of Stirling in Scotland. And prior to that, she was schooled in France for 7 years, though she's originally from Kinsale in Cork. Jessica is passionate about delivering excellent customer service and supporting the civil service ethos of integrity, impartiality, equality, fairness and respect. Jessica, the floor is yours. I'll just pull your slides up now. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, is that coming up okay for you?
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lovely. So I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. And what I'll be doing is essentially reading from the slides that we have here and detailing what's on the screen. At the end of the presentation, when we go through the question and answer session, we can talk about anything in more detail if you want to, or we can go back to a certain slide if you have any questions on a particular slide. So welcome and thank you all for coming from everybody here at Revenue. Today we're talking about tax. Now this is a small introduction on starting in the tax world. It's not going into too much detail and we're going to try not to scare you off. We're going to look at showing you how to get set up on My Account and manage your own tax. We're then going to look at ensuring you are paying the correct amount of tax and to show you that there's nothing to be afraid of. Next slide, please, Bamba. So what is tax used for? Now, I know a lot of people, most people would have heard of taxation, tax. It can be a scary word, but it's essential for society. So when tax is collected, it's not just kept somewhere. It's not just resting in your account. So on this slide, we have a graph showing basically generally where tax is taken and what it's used for. So we have, and this is taken from 2023 as an example, and the source is whereyourmoneygoes.gov.ie. So social protection is 23.9 billion euro of your tax, which goes to providing pension for your grandmothers. You know, it's a good thing, social protection. We wouldn't want to be without it. Health, 21.4 billion euro in 2023 went to health. Housing, we have 6.4 billion euro in housing. Education, which encompasses what we're doing here today, 10 billion euro in 2023. We have transport at 3.5 billion euro. Justice, so again, courts, access to justice, help with justice and legal aid, 3.4 billion euro. Debt servicing and EU payments, 13.6 billion euro. And then there are additional departments, which accounts for 21.3 billion euro. So what tax is used for is very, very wide, but we're not looking into that in more detail. We're going to be talking about your tax and what it means for you. Next slide, please. Okay, so registering for what's called My Account. Now, what we're talking about here is if you have never interacted with Revenue before, if you may have paid tax, but you may not have registered for the online services. If you have never had a job before or a job before in Ireland, you may not have used it. And this is the essential first step. So on this slide, This can be set up at any age in advance of you having your first job. And in advance is the key word we'd like to highlight here. Because if you set up in advance, it will alleviate lots of issues many people have after the fact. So we begin by selecting the My Account link in the top right-hand corner of the Revenue website. Use www.revenue.ie, and there's no need to Google for tax information. You might accidentally sign up for an agent. Now, this means that when some people want to contact the revenue commissioners, they'll go on to Google or another search engine, and they'll type in tax, tax back, tax Ireland, and the first sites that might come up are for third-party tax agents, and they will charge you to access their services and to help you use the online tax services that Revenue provides for free. So if you go to the direct link, you get directly to the Revenue Commissioner's website. And again, that's a free service. So on this slide, we have a picture of the actual Revenue Services website, what you're going to see. And we have highlighted the My Account button, which is in the top right-hand corner. Next slide, please. Okay, so here again, we're looking at more detail into getting into My Account for the first time. So welcome to the Revenue homepage. You can access it on most computers and devices. That means that it's also accessible on most mobile phones if you have a strong internet connection, personal devices, or desktops. If you're logging in for the first time, you'll need to register. If you have previously logged in, you can just click Sign In. The pictures we have on this slide show the full desktop access, and then we screenshot the Sign In button if you're on a desktop or if you're using the mobile version. So those are the two screens that you can see. Next slide, please. There are two sign-in options. So the option number 1 is called MyGov ID. Now this works for all government agencies, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail further on. The second option is My Account, which is Revenue only. Now on the right-hand side of the screen, select the Register Now button. On this slide, we have a photograph of what that will look like, and you will see that it will ask for your PPS number, your date of birth, a password, and then you have the Sign In or the Register Now button. Next slide, please. Registering for My Account. To register, you will need to enter the following details: your personal public service number, which is your PPSN, your name, your date of birth, address, phone number, and email address. Now you will need all of those details. On this slide, we have a screenshot of what you'll see when you're starting your registration. It details what I have just called out to you. And it also explains that you can get instant access if you have additional documentation. Now, I would just like to point out that this doesn't apply for when you're registering your very first job, because for the first job, which is what I'm going to detail, you will have to go the long way around. So there's also a picture of the Start Registration button, which is what you'll be clicking on. Next slide, please. So here we have 3 screenshots, and it's showing you exactly what would appear as you commence the registration process. So again, to reiterate, you'll be asked for your PPS number. And if you don't know what your PPS number is, for instance, if you haven't been issued one, if you've only recently moved to Ireland, there's an option to click on a link and it will tell you further instructions there. But here we're going to go on the basis that you have a PPS number and that you've input it in the box. The next step is, what is your name, which hopefully you'll know. You'll put in your first name and your family name. Then you'll click the next button. And the third question of the 6 questions, what is your date of birth? So we do the date, month, year format and not month, date, year format. Then you click the next button. Next slide, please. The next steps, again, we have 3 screenshots on this slide, which are showing you exactly what you'll see on the Revenue website. You'll fill in your address under what is your address. And here there's also a link to click if your address happens to not be in the Republic of Ireland. So you would put in your street address, there's an optional address line 2, your city or town, the city or county, your area code if known. Now in Ireland at the moment, you should have an area code. This would only not be the case if maybe, I can't think off the top of my head, if you're building a new house, it may not have been issued. In apartments, you may have to just verify that your apartment is the correct area code. But like that, you should have an area code, and it's very advisable to put it in because, again, in Ireland, there are large townlands that share addresses, and you want your post to go specifically to your individual house. Then, once you're happy with the address in the format that you've put it in, you would click Next. And the next question is, what is your mobile number? So you input your mobile number and click Next, bearing in mind again that if you don't have a mobile number, there's a link to click to get further information. And question 6 of 6, what is your email address? Now, to access the online My Account services, you do need an email address. That is a requirement. And it's important to note that notifications will be sent to this email address. It is important that you use a valid email address to which only you have access. Once you've input your email address, you click the Next button. Next slide, please. Now, the final step allows you to review your details before submitting them to Revenue. So on this slide, again, we have a screenshot of what's viewable on the Revenue website, and it asks, are these details correct? Please check that your details are correct before submitting them for verification. So you would read through them, ensuring that there are no typos, spaces, or incorrect information. If you're happy with it, you click on the button Submit for verification. If there's an error or you'd like to change anything, you have the option to click Edit on each of the fields. Next slide, please. Revenue posts your temporary password to you. It expires after 21 days. The registration team may email you, giving you a phone number on which you can contact them to finalize your setup. Each time you sign in, a code will be sent to your mobile for extra security. So on this slide, there's a photo of a letter. Now it's an example letter that Revenue will send you, and it's to showcase the headed paper, the format of the letter, and to show the format of the temporary password. Now, I would like to say at this juncture, it has been known that people have received fraudulent emails and texts from somebody claiming to be Revenue. It is rarer that they would receive a postal correspondence, but again, this is just for your reference. And I'd like to say as well, if you ever have any doubt of the official status of something you receive claiming to be from Revenue, just contact Revenue and we'll confirm whether or not it's correct. Next slide, please. So how Revenue contacts you. Again, Revenue will never contact you by email directly to your personal email or text asking you for details, and Revenue will never send a link to you. Revenue will, however, let you know that you have a message in My Inquiries, which you can securely access via My Account. So to clarify, you may get an email to your personal email address from Revenue, but it will be telling you to go and proactively log into the secure My Account. It will not tell you to click a link or to take any action in the unsecure email. And this is a good way to ward off fraud or phishing emails. Next slide, please. So, registering your first job. When you start working for the first time, you must register your job using My Account. Future jobs will be set up by your employer once you give them your PPSN. So again, this is a very big distinction. You only have to register your job once, and it's always your very, very first job in Ireland. If you've previously worked in other countries, that's perfectly fine, but you will still need to register the first job in Ireland. And then any other job you get ever in Ireland, it will be your employer who registers it for you. So on this screen, we have a screenshot of the My Account login. And again, it's just bringing you back to how to log into your My Account, and then we'll go through the steps of how to physically register your first job. Next slide, please. To register your first job, and again, only your first job, you need the following details. Your employer's tax registration number, which has a similar format to your PPS number, and this is something that your employer will give you. The date your job starts, how often you will be paid, so whether your payment frequency is weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, an estimate of what your overall income will be, and that will be an annual estimate, residency details if you have recently moved to Ireland. So on this slide, we also have a screenshot of your My Account, and it shows what you will be clicking on. Now, it will say under jobs and pensions, add a job, and it gives you the option to click start. And it goes on to explain who is it for. So this service is for anyone who is starting a job in Ireland for the first time, is starting to receive payments from a private pension, so not a DSP, i.e. social welfare or pension. So what do you need? To add a new job or pension, you will need, and now I have said this, but I will say it again, your new employer or pension provider's tax registration number, the date your job starts or pension becomes payable, and how often you will be paid. To tell us an estimate of your overall income. If you have recently moved to Ireland, you will need to provide some additional details, such as arrival date. And then the screenshot goes on to give you an estimate of how long it will take. So about 10 minutes for most people. Some people may have more or less questions to answer. The sections are as follows. Section 1, add your new job or pension. Section 2, tell us how long you have been living in the Republic of Ireland. Section 3, tell us about your overall incomes. Section 4, review your details and submit. And then you have the option again to click start. Next slide, please. The employer's name will automatically appear based on the tax registration number you entered on the previous screen. It's important to note that some employers will have a business name which is different to their trading name. For example, you may see Centra or Spar, and you think that when you start working there, it will say Centra or Spar, but it could be Murphy's Kilbrittain, and it could have a different name. But once the employer's number is correct, and it is the one that the employer has given you, it should link up to their account. So on this slide, we also have a screenshot, and it's showing when you click on the start button that we previously mentioned, this is your chance to input your job details. So again, it's asking for the employer name, the job start, how often you're paid, excuse me, and it will ask if you're a proprietary director of the company or related to a proprietary director of the company. Now, this is usually no, unless you happen to be a proprietary director, and there is a link telling you what that means. Now, this may take effective, excuse me, I'll just mute. Excuse me. So, if, for instance, you work on a farm or for your parents' company. Next slide, please. So, remember, you will only ever have to register your very first job in Ireland. Any other job or pension will be registered on your behalf by the employer or the pension provider. Next slide. So, understanding what makes up your take-home pay. Here we'll talk about credits and rate bands. If you earn under 18,750 euro in 2024, which is 360 euro per week, you will not pay income tax because your personal tax credits reduce the amount of income tax you pay. So your rate band means that income tax up to 42,000 annually is charged at 20%, and income above that is charged at 40%. Then credits reduce the tax you pay. So to explain that in more detail, It means that now some people think that if you're a student, for example, you don't pay tax. So it doesn't matter if you're a student or not, it doesn't matter how old you are, it only matters how much income you earn. So again, regardless of who you are, if it's 18,750 in the year, there is no income tax paid. And that is because all of your basic credits will cover the amount you're earning, so there's nothing left to pay. Now, when your income tax is charged at 20 or 40%, we then go on to reduce the tax you pay or the tax payable by the amount of credits that you have. Next page, please. So tax credits, and here we have a screenshot of some example credits. So every single person who happens to be a person is automatically entitled to what's called a personal credit. So the personal credit will vary depending on your civil status. So if you're a single person, it's €1,875. Now this rate is for 2024. These amounts change depending on the budget. If you're a married person or in a civil partnership, it's €3,750. So this credit is an annual figure. And again, once your income is charged, the credit is then deducted. So for example, if you're paid monthly, the annual figure is divided into 12 and you will get 1/12 of the credit in each pay period. So in each monthly pay slip, that 1/12 of your annual figure is deducted from the charged income. So you will also get an employee PAYE tax credit, and the 2024 amount is €1,875. So again, this is the same for every single person. As long as you have a PAYE employment, you will get this exact credit. Now, so every person we've established is a person, so they get their personal credit. And if you have an employment, you have your employee credit, and that does not vary. There are also additional credits. Now, there's a full list of all credits available on the Revenue website, but we've taken a screenshot here of some example credits. So there's a blind tax credit for a single person of €1,650. There's a blind tax credit for one spouse or civil partner who's blind, and that's €1,650. Again, these are annual figures. And there's the blind tax credit for both spouses or civil partners blind, and that's €3,300. There's also a guide dog allowance, which is €825. Now, it's not listed on this slide, but there's also an assistance dog allowance, which is the same as the guide dog allowance. So that's €825. So if you're entitled to any additional credit, these or other, they will be added on to your annual allowance in addition to the personal and employee credit, which means your income will be charged at either 20 or 40%. And then again, your annual credits will be divided into your pay period and they will deduct the amount of tax payable. Next slide, please. So you will not have to pay Universal Social Charge, USC, unless you earn more than $13,000 in 2024. Excuse me. So Universal Social Charge is technically not a tax. It is, like the name suggests, a social charge, but a tax by any other name, you're still giving money that's being remitted to revenue and used in the same way a tax would be. So if you earn anything up to €13,000, USC will not be charged at all. As soon as you earn 1 cent over 13,000, USD starts to be charged on the entirety. Next slide, please. Pay-related social insurance, or PRSI. What is PRSI? PRSI contributions are collected by Revenue, but paid to the Department of Social Protection, who deal with all related queries. Now, that's just a way of saying that Revenue don't deal with PRSI. So it will be shown on your pay slip, and it is collected in the same way as a tax, but it doesn't come to Revenue. And if you have an issue with your PRSI, questions, queries, or comments, you contact the Department of Social Protection directly, not the Office of the Revenue Commissioners. How much does PRSI cost? So under €352, there's no PRSI paid. And if it's over €424, PRSI is charged at 4% on everything earned. Next slide, please. Your employment is registered. What happens next? So step 1, Revenue sends instructions to your employer telling them what to deduct from your gross pay using an RPN, which is a revenue payroll notification. Step 2, your employer deducts income tax, USC, PRSI from your wages and sends it to revenue. So again, revenue will tell your employer how to correctly tax you once your employment is correctly registered. So if it's your first job, the onus will be on you to have registered it correctly. If it's any subsequent job or pension, the onus would be on the employer or the pension provider to register the job for you. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we just have a visual of money, essentially, just to highlight what I'm about to say to you. So under the Payment of Wages Act 1991, you have a right to a payslip every time you are paid. And it's important that we highlight this because you may have heard of something called cash in hand, under the table, wink, wink payments. They all mean that you're not getting a payslip. Now, it's common misconception that that is a good thing for you because you won't pay tax if you're paid under the table or without getting a payslip. But as we've previously discussed, you may not be paying tax even if you are correctly registered if your income is below a certain threshold. And even if you are paying tax, it should be the correct amount for you, taking into account your own individual credits. And as we looked at before that, when you do pay tax, it goes to necessary things in our nation, which we all enjoy as citizens here. Also, if you're paying tax on your payslip and it's registered, and God forbid there's another pandemic, there could be something like the PUP payment, which was the pandemic unemployment payment, where people who were in sectors that closed during the pandemic received a payment. Now, if you hadn't been registered and if you weren't getting payslips, you would have had no income at all. You would not have been entitled to this payment. So I would strongly urge anyone who is considering being paid under the table to think again and register your employment so that you get your payslip, which you are entitled to. Next slide. How to read a payslip, what it's for and why it's important. So your payslip contains your PPS number, the total amount of tax paid in the pay period and this year, your PRSI contribution, deducted if you earn €352 or more weekly, paid to the Department of Social Protection, the total amount of Universal Social Charge, USC, paid in the pay period and this year. So this just means that your payslip is very important and has lots of helpful information so that you can keep track of what you're earning year to date. So from your very first payslip, for the sake of argument, it's January. As the year continues, you will see how much you've earned from January to now. You'll see the deductions on what you've earned. Next slide, please. So, example of a registered job. Now, on this slide, we have an example payslip. Now, this isn't somebody's real payslip. It is a pared down version just to illustrate it. But I will go through it with you. So, your payslip shows all this information and you receive the net amount. The net amount is what remains after the deductions. This payslip shows that Lucy received her full earnings into her bank account as she had correctly set up her employment in my account. Now, in our example, we have somebody whose gross pay, the pay before deductions, is €200, and her net pay is also €200. Now, this doesn't mean that if you register, you're going to come out with the same net pay as gross pay. It's just in this instance, Lucy may have been a student working short hours after school or weekends, and her earnings were not high enough to pay tax. So she's registered, we see her income, we charge it, we deduct from that her tax credits, but because she has enough credits to cover her income, she gets her full pay. So €200 comes into her hand. Next slide, please. Now here we have an example of a job that hasn't been registered. So in this case, on our screenshot, again, we have a payslip, but this person did not register their job, which means that they don't have a link to credits or rate band. So they're going to be what's called emergency tax. So in this instance, Lucy got her basic pay or her gross pay of €200, but she was taxed at the highest amount for everything. So her tax was charged at 40%, her PRSI at 4%, her USC at 8%. So she only took home as her net pay €96. And nobody wants that to happen. So now, if she had registered beforehand, before getting paid, this wouldn't have happened, but it did happen. Now, it's not brilliant when you come home with less money than you are entitled to, but don't worry, because that's what revenue is here for, and you can contact us and it can be fixed, and any incorrect or overpaid tax will be paid back to you. Next slide, please. So, avoid emergency tax and how to reclaim it if needed. So emergency tax is always charged at 40%. Now, once your details are registered and up to date, you shouldn't be taxed at this higher rate. However, if you do remain on emergency tax after having registered your first job, you contact Revenue before finishing working with this employment to have it corrected. So if you contact Revenue before you finish your employment, we can make sure that the overpaid tax comes back through your next payslip for that employment. If it happens that the employment has ceased and you no longer work there, still contact Revenue and we will arrange to have the emergency tax paid back to you, either through your next employment, which will be registered by the next employer, or at the end of the year once you do your tax return. Next slide, please. So if you have any questions or concerns about your tax, contact Revenue is the moral of the story. Not all issues are the same. It's not always the same problem. And it's easiest just to come directly to us so we can see what it is in your situation and get it fixed as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. So how you can contact Revenue. So you can go online through your My Account, which we looked at earlier, and via your My Inquiries. That's the secure online system, and it's essentially emailing Revenue. And this is worked quite quickly, and you should receive a reply, well, quickly. And then you can also phone us. So there's a PAYE helpline, and the phone number is 0173 83 636. And that is open from 9:30 to 1:30 Monday to Friday. There's also an appointment service. This is for very convoluted, difficult queries that may need to be seen in person, and the number is 0173 83 660. Then you have public offices around the country. So there's a public office in Dublin, Cork, Galway, Limerick, and they're open from 9:30 to 1:30 Monday to Friday, where you can just call in and discuss it with somebody there. They may direct you online or to the phone or to the appointment service, or they may be able to deal with you directly at the desk. Next slide, please. Revenue also has access officers for persons with a disability. So access officers are responsible for providing or arranging for assistance and guidance to persons with disabilities accessing services provided by Revenue. They act as a point of contact for people with disabilities wishing to access such services. The contact details shown on the next slide can be used for queries relating to persons with disabilities. When contacting the access officers, please provide your name, telephone number, and personal public service number, which is your PPSN, and details of the accommodation you require. Next slide. Access officer contact details. There's a postal address, Access Officer Revenue Commissioners, 14/15 Upper O'Connell Street, Dublin 1, D for Delta, 01, Y for Yankee, T for Tango, 32. There's a phone number, 0173833629, an email address, disabilityaccessofficer@revenue.ie. And again, Bamba mentioned at the start of this that these slides will be shared, so you'll have full access to this information. Now, next slide, please. Sorry. Public services card. So your personal access to your public services. Ireland's e-government strategy. On this slide, we have a screenshot showing your MyGov ID and public services card. As part of Ireland's e-government strategy, MyGov ID's digital citizen identity is being adopted by all public sector bodies to provide access to online services for citizens. So we're going to have a quick chat about this because this is something dealt with the Department of Social Protection as well, but it can be used to access revenue services. Next slide, please. MyGov ID. Basic MyGov ID can access Jobs Ireland, My Welfare, which is the Department of Social Protection. A verified MyGov ID account can access My Account, which is the Revenue Online Service, driver licenses and driving tests, SUSI, which you may need for grants, electoral register, so you can register to vote. Visit www.mygovid.ie for more information. Now on this slide, we just have logos for certain organizations that you can access if you have a MyGov ID. So again, there's My Welfare, RSA My Road Safety, Digital Post Box, the Revenue Commissioners, SUSI, Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, HAP, which is the Housing Assistance Payment, My Cocoa Local Authority Services, Department of Foreign Affairs, Jobs Ireland, NDLS, which is the National Driver Licence Service, National Childcare Scheme, Early Learning and Care, Voter.ie, and Decision Support Services. Next slide, please. How to get your card. On this slide, we show an example card, which will be your public services card if you get it, and it will have your photo, your name, and the date of birth, or possibly the date of issue. Your card is used to verify your basic MyGov ID account. At the PSC Centre, the Department of Social Protection offices, your ID will be verified, your photograph will be taken, your signature will be recorded, and then your public services card will be posted to you in 7 to 10 working days. And this is a form to then access all of the organizations that we've discussed on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Now, working for revenue. If by any chance learning about that brief introduction to tax made you think revenue sure is fantastic, I'd like to work there. Well, this is how you can do it. So all applications to revenue would go through public jobs, or you may have heard it called PASS. Now, the good thing about revenue is revenue recruits at both entry and graduate level to an inclusive and diverse team of 7,000 nationally. Now, this means that you don't necessarily need a graduate degree to work for revenue. Now, you can obviously have one and still work for revenue, but it's not a requirement at entry level. There's work-life balance benefits, such as blended working, where you can work from home, flexible working hours and work patterns, and shorter working year if, for example, you wanted to take term time or essentially shorter working year. The name gives it away there. There's excellent training and career development possibilities in that you can have a job here and still do training. There's lots of tax, as you can imagine, training. There's the ITI, which is the Irish Tax Institute, which offers training programs. There's the University of Limerick accountancy degree, and there are Revenue will offer to pay some of these fees if it's a relevant degree to your work. And you can do that while getting paid a salary for your actual job. And lastly, to do this, you can register your interest on www.publicjobs.ie to be informed of recruitment opportunities. Next slide. So the grades in the civil service. Now this is just an overview, but there is a service officer, clerical officer, executive officer, higher executive officer, administrative officer, assistant principal, principal officer, and assistant secretary. And this slide just shows those grades highlighted. Now, this is just to show that there's lots of progression available. So if you were to join Revenue at one of the very first benchmark grades, like service officer, there's full opportunity to develop and to get promoted up through these grades throughout your time at Revenue. Next slide, please. Revenue office locations. Now on this slide, we have a lovely little map of Ireland, which shows how many offices of Revenue are throughout Ireland in each county. Let's see, it's quite small, but I'll try and read. So in Donegal, there should be 6 offices. In Mayo 3, Sligo 3, Roscommon 1, Monaghan 3, Louth 2, Westmeath 3, Dublin 29, Kildare 1, Offaly 2, Galway 2, Clare 4, Wexford 3, Kilkenny 2, Tipperary 2, Limerick 5, Kerry 2, Cork 11, Waterford 4. So the reason we have this slide here is because in Revenue, you can apply for you can have expressions of interest in to move to a different office. You can apply for mobility. There's a possibility that you would start working in Cork, for example, but due to circumstances or the want to change, you could always move to Dublin or Wexford. And the option is to move your employment with you in a different office. So that is very practical. Next slide, please. So, to apply for civil service roles, you must first register with Public Jobs. So to register, competitions are advertised on https://www.revenue.ie and https://www.publicjobs.ie. You can register your interest on, again, the Public Jobs link, https://www.publicjobs.ie, and you can set up an account to search for career opportunities and to receive alerts. And you can find us on Twitter at revenue.ie. Then once you've registered, and if you see a competition that appeals to you, there's the competition process. So candidates will be asked to complete an application form detailing their education and employment history. Selection methods may include psychometric tests, shortlisting, preliminary interview and/or video assessment, competitive interview, additional selection tools. Next slide, please. So, WAM. Revenue has been proud partners with AHEAD and WAM since 2005. Over the past 10 years, Revenue has hosted 30 WAM candidates. Now, I'm just going to give a brief overview here because we are in partnership with them, but obviously AHEAD is hosting this program, so they'd be more inclined to tell you more details about it. The Willing Able Mentoring, or WAM program, is a work placement program which aims to promote access to the labour market for graduates with disabilities and build the capacity of employers to integrate disability into the mainstream workplace. The program offers graduates with disabilities up to 10 months paid mentored work experience at EO, which is executive officer level. At the end of the 10 months, graduates may then apply for the role of EO on a permanent basis. It is run in association with AHEAD and Public Jobs. Next slide. OWL, OWL. The Oireachtas Work Learning Training Programme is an applied learning, development and socialisation programme for young adults with an intellectual disability. OWL trainees get first-hand on-the-job experience and applied learning in a work setting. The OWL graduate programme aims to find meaningful and viable permanent employment for their graduates in the wider civil and public service. Next slide, please. On this slide, we have a list of useful links. Now, I won't read out the full link, but I will read out what they are. And again, the slides will be sent out afterwards, so you have full access to them and you can click on them instead of hearing me read out lots of letters. So we have the Revenue Careers link, the Public Jobs or PASS link, Revenue Twitter handle, the AHEAD or WAM link, WAM Works link, the OWL link, the Generation Apprenticeship link, and AON, which is assessment.aon for preparing your assessment help. Next slide, please. And this is the slide that tells us that this is the end of the presentation. So we're now going to move into the Q&A session. Thank you all for listening and let us know if you have any questions.